As the first next-gen entry, FIFA 21 has a few neat tricks in store for anyone playing on PS5 or Xbox Series S and X. At its core, the game gets all the usual visual tweaks and additions we get every year, new camera angles, updated rosters, but what makes this extra special are the visual upgrades. Specifically, the improved rendering of materials, shadows, lighting, and the big one, hair. FIFA 21 on Next Gen shows off the Frostbite engine's new Strand Hair Technology, giving select players some of the most cutting-edge hair physics we've seen to date. Seriously, players like Cavani, Alisson and Messi have never looked better. So how's the effect come together in FIFA 21 overall? How does it compare to the last gen FIFA? And is this possibly the best hair we've seen in a game? To answer all this, I've invited one Alex Battaglia to join me as we admire some beautiful hair. How's it going?
It's good. I wish I had as nice locks as some of these gentlemen we're going to be looking at today. But yeah, I'm doing good. We've been talking about this game kind of internally on our Slack all week, and you sharing some media from it.
Yeah.
Beyond the, the hair that we're going to get to later in the video, you also mentioned a couple of other upgrades that this next gen version seems to be coming with in terms of like resolution and anti-aliasing.
Yeah, so like the 4K image kind of was maxed out on PS4 Pro and One X. So as you can imagine, just moving to this version, there wasn't much of an expectation of an upgrade. We still get 3840 by 2160. The difference, the minute difference really is there's improved anti-aliasing. So on the original, there'd be kind of sharp stair-stepping on the 4K image. Now it's kind of nicely blended, to put it simply. And on top of that, it's the 60 FPS game we've always known, and I mean, it's in the last few years not deviated that much from 60 during regular sort of camera gameplay. I will say, regardless of which console you own, even Series S, PS5, Series X, it's 60 FPS, but I think as a fan of the series, the disappointment is that the cutscenes, the replays, even the Be a Pro mode, where you get to kind of take charge of a player from kind of his angle of the pitch, it's all still 30 FPS capped, which might have been nice to upgrade and see that improve. But otherwise, it's the FIFA you know and love in terms of the kind of basic rendering setup.
Yeah, that's pretty common in sports games, targeting 60 while you're on the field, and then all the interludes where they bring in the depth of field and presumably pump up some of the LODs and things like that.
Yeah, that's true.
They're usually 30. Yeah.
One quick thing, obviously there are some kind of extra upgrades in terms of, loading times are now snappier getting into the action. And where there's a bit of a wait, there's a cutscene in between where you can see the players training and kind of lining up before the game. Also, PS5, haptic feedback and adaptive triggers are used. The triggers actually add pressure as soon as you're the last man running towards the goal. Goalkeeper's just in front of you. It kind of adds a lot of pressure and tension to the running on R2. So there is that, but it's
that's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's always fun to see how they use these things. But obviously today we're talking about the next gen difference in pure visual terms.
Yeah, I think one of the really cool things is you've made some really excellent side-by-side shots here of like the previous gen version on Xbox One X and Xbox Series X on the right-hand side here. Beyond the hair itself, I think one of the really interesting things that is different between this version in terms of rendering is the shading model for skin and also the way shadows are done on that skin. On the left-hand side, looking at Xbox One X here, you can see, I would say, like a kind of normal last generation skin rendering that you'd see in a 60 FPS game. So it's not like you're The Last of Us 2 or something like that in a highly directed cutscene. This is just a shot on the pitch. How does the character look in the lighting that's already there?
Yeah.
You look over on the right, though, they've completely changed the skin rendering model to include a much more realistic subsurface scattering. And, even though these models, the one on the right looks so much more realistic, if you look up close, the level of geometry on them is almost the exact same, I'm pretty sure. Right, Tom?
Yeah, it just goes to show what a difference good materials make. And as you say, the framework of the character, from Messi to Alisson, they're all kind of the same, but it's the way that their skin actually interacts with light. And having multiple passes, multiple layers to the skin, the subsurface scattering, it diffuses the light in a more natural way. And on top of that, you get this kind of specular layer on top, which lets you see the droplets of rain on their brow. And, in rainy scenarios, it'll build up over the course of a game. So this is the sort of stuff that you'd see in like CG pre-render sort of footage like years ago of like, here's the next gen FIFA. But this is now actually real-time rendering, subsurface scattering, and every character, every player, I should say, benefits across the board. Also, you'll have noticed shadows, a big difference. And I wanted to pick your brain about this one because I'm not sure exactly what it could be. I mean, the gut reaction is, okay, it's probably ambient occlusion. You see how Trent Alexander-Arnold has kind of this white sort of a glowing line under it on his lower eyelid. And that's kind of shaded in properly in the Series X version. Yeah, it looks so different, and shading like inside his mouth areas where, light shouldn't be able to get to so easily, they're now properly shaded in.
There's a lot of ways you could do that. It could be screen space ambient occlusion coming in and taking care of that, or even like what they can do sometimes with character models is they'll mask out areas like the inside of the mouth or the area around the eyes, like the tear ducts, so that they'll have like a static AO layer, so that it will prevent that kind of glow that you get in video games rather often. But another thing that actually just might be different is that the skin shading model now is different. So the old version of the model, one of the ways they used to do skin shading in like the old days, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did it in this game too, was to make it look like light was diffusing on a surface more, it would wrap the light around the model, around its geometry a little bit. But that would have the problem of causing the backside of like where the light's coming from to have like that, the light from the front side wrap around the backside. So the underside of his eyes would be getting the same light as the top of his brow. And you can see that in games like, I don't know, like Half-Life 2 Source games and things like that. I don't know, that's a very long-winded explanation for saying that it looks a hell of a lot better now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really does. I mean, the resolution just on its own, there's no more flickering and dithering on the edges of shadows in these sort of circling shots. It doesn't obviously make much of a difference when you're at the standard view of the pitch where you're barely going to make out most of these details, but the up-close shots after you've scored a goal, for example, they make a big difference. And, it's the difference between an uncanny looking character or something more photorealistic, which is where we are now.
You also did notice, though, even when from far away, you did notice some differences between the last gen and the first gen versions of this game, right? The new gen. You said, I don't know, something about the lighting being different just looking at these side-by-sides. It's a little hard to tell what exactly it could be, though.
Yeah, it could be anything from, just the way lighting, the materials on the grass are updated to allow for better bounce. It could be anything, or it could just be baked in. It's one of those things where it's impossible to pass. What we can see is the players, and I suppose there's no delaying this one. It's the hair that's really grabbed our attention. I mean, Messi is a really good one to just sort of kick off with. There's a lot to say on this.
One thing you can notice is that both the hair on his head as well as the beard are done completely different. There's a lot of technical reasons why this is so different. I guess to go through like a little short history of hair rendering in video games, that the way it's done on the left here on Messi, for example, is an extremely common way. And in fact, I would say like 90% of games do their hair like on the left here, where it's a series of like transparent or partially transparent cards of hair. So like groupings of hair mapped together all over a head as little cards that can have a bit of physics applied to them, but it's basically a way to render hair in a more cheap way instead of rendering each individual strand. It's good enough for like far away shots, I would always say, but usually when you zoom in on card-based hair like this here, it has its fair share of problems. And that's almost like 90% the way games do hair. There have been other ways to do hair, like you can see in like Tress Effects, which has been in a number of games in its 1.0 or 2.0 versions, as well as NVIDIA's Hairworks and a couple other ones. And those are strand-based hair, which is very much so like the way it's done in the next-gen version of Frostbite here on the Series X that we would see on the right-hand side, where it looks quite a bit different. This is where each individual strand of hair is now to a certain level of fidelity being rendered out individually instead of like a whole bunch of cards of hair together. And it has a profound effect on just the general realism. There's a couple of reasons why I think this version of hair that we're seeing here is possibly, if not the best version of kind of hair that I've ever seen in a game. And one of the ones is that the strand-based hair that we've seen in other games in the past, like in The Witcher 3 or in Lara Croft Tomb Raider games and things like that, is that those ones used the normal geometry processing on the GPU. And that is just horrible for performance because GPUs are not very good at rendering things that are smaller than a pixel, to say the least. And this just actually uses straight compute shaders. And the way it's done, it doesn't need to use typical multi-sample anti-aliasing. It actually kind of renders the hair and shades it and anti-aliases it in a very smart way. And you get this really kind of beautiful look that would be, I would say, much more expensive in the way it's been done in the past. So this is an extremely smart rendering, to say the least. It looks good, and it's also looks to be very efficient as well.
Yeah, and I think the price is paid really in that you can't have every player on the pitch use this effect. Only, star players really got the treatment. So players like Cavani, Alisson, of course, Liverpool, and also Messi, of course. They're the ones with this strand system while also having proper physics simulation added as well. There's a lot of players where they have a strand system, but it's purely kind of what you call a skin. So it's non-interactive and it just stays static. So players like Neymar, huge upgrade in terms of the complexity of the hair, the tresses, the way it looks on screen. It's another level, and the beard as well. I will say there is one defect to this approach, which is the flickering. I'm sure you've noticed.
Going through their notes, I don't actually see any reason why there should be flickering here, so I'm going to assume it's some sort of setup bug. I actually don't think, watching their preview videos and on how the tech looks, I think this is actually just a bug. So not some sort of fallout with the way the technique works at all. It looks like if you stop from going from frame to frame, it's like adding in and getting rid of strands of hair, so it gives it a flicker. It's not some sort of transparency sorting issue, I don't believe, or anything like that. But I think this is going to be absolutely empowering for developers working on Frostbite in future games. The fact that we're already seeing it in a sports title at the beginning of the launch, we're going to see huge iteration over time with this, where like your big next-gen Star Wars games on Frostbite or your next-gen Battlefields or any game is going to see really cool looking hair, and it only getting better over time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is the result of a lot of years of work. I think 3, possibly 4 years by the time this shipped. There's more planned and more hair types, more hairstyles, which will react differently. And obviously, there's a lot more to come from Frostbite in general. It's a very exciting sign of what's to come. All right, well, that'll wrap up our look at hair in FIFA 21 and the various other upgrades they've added. I think more to come in FIFA 22. This is like the first towing of the water, and usually it takes a year or two for developers to really mature and grow familiar with new hardware. So we'll have to see how things go for the next one, but as a first step, this is really impressive stuff, and for my money, the best hair I've seen in a game so far. It's really remarkable stuff.
I agree, totally.
All right, that'll do for today. Thanks so much, Alex, for joining me here.
Of course there, Tom.
And if you did like this video, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell to get notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch with myself, Alex, or the Digital Foundry team, just use Twitter. But from the both of us, thanks for watching.